Growing up, I always had a fascination with gargoyles. My hometown was full of them. Over 1,000 at last count, if I recall correctly. After November 11th, 1926, when construction on Route 66 began, the Gargoyles of Cold Stone, New Mexico was as famous of a tourist stop as the Wigwam Village or Cadillac Ranch. There are still black and white photos in the town hall of 50s models cars parked up and down Main Street, and travelers going in and out of local shops. As primary roadways turn from two-lane affairs into interstates, built far from our dot on the map, the tourism industry dried up like the landscape around us. The tourists left, but the gargoyles remained. I'm sure back in those days it was an eclectic thing to stop and see for an afternoon, but there wasn't much reason to stick around after an afternoon's lunch, and a drive through town to see the variety of granite monstrosities. To make tourism matters worse, Cold Stone didn't even have a hotel. Even as a child, I always found it odd. If we wanted people to come to our little backwater, it would make sense to have a place for people to sleep at night. "Why don't we have a hotel in town, Dad?" I asked my father one night at dinner. He just chewed his food and looked at his plate. Tom Morris was a man of few words as it was. And if there was one thing he didn't usually entertain, it was a question that didn't provide you with useful knowledge. He had been a deputy in our county my entire life, and I guess the job had a way of making someone develop that no-nonsense attitude. Knowing this, I expected him to tell me he didn't know. But, to my surprise, he engaged me in this seemingly pointless conversation. "It's not safe, Kevin," my father said. "Having strangers around town just kind of invites trouble. We've got a close-knit community here. It's been that way since I was a kid." I pondered his response, and it made sense to me as a little kid. Stranger danger was a catchphrase my teachers used a lot in school, so it wasn't a hard sell to make to 8-year-old me. "Yeah, I guess it isn't great to have people you don't know wandering around town," I responded. "But you're always saying the town needs more business. And a hotel seems like a good one. It could bring some of the tourists back, too." "I suppose you're right," he replied. "A lot of risks, though." "Like what?" I asked him. More chewing and plate staring. "Kevin, we'll talk about it when you're a bit older. But I'll just tell you this. Strangers in town may not always bring trouble. Sometimes the trouble happens to the strangers." Unsatisfied with the answer, I pushed him for more information, but his responses to my questions became shorter, and then didn't come at all. We ate our dinner in silence. His answers still swam around my head. I had thought he meant strangers cause trouble, but I couldn't figure out what kind of trouble would happen to a stranger in a little place like Cold Stone. As I grew into a teenager, Dad and I got a lot closer. He was a single father, and raising me while working full-time as one of only 5 deputies in our county put a lot of strain on him. I did my best to take on a good portion of the household chores, and learned to cook fairly well. It seemed to raise his spirits when I started pitching in regularly, and he didn't have a list of chores to do after a long shift. My chore list probably looked similar to yours growing up. I took out the trash, washed some laundry, vacuumed, and cooked dinner now and again. One chore that I had that I'll guess you didn't was gargoyle maintenance. Twice a week, I took a soft-bristled brush and a bucket of water to the end of our walkway, and scrubbed the 2 gargoyles perched on their pedestals, Ogle and Yarlin. I know it seems weird, but Dad had named them when they bought the house, and had them installed. Every home, business, and government building in Cold Stone had at least 2 gargoyles in front of them, and several buildings had them perched on roofs and outcroppings. In high school civics class, I learned there was a building code in our town that required any building to maintain at least 2 well-kept gargoyles near its entrance. I found it odd, but it made sense why they were everywhere you went in town. They weren't just outside houses, though. Our home, like many others, had gargoyles on the fireplace mantel, tiny gargoyles perched atop street signs. All of the lampposts lining our antiquated main street had stooped and smiling stone imps on each of them. Even the damn high school mascot was the Cold Stone Fighting Gargoyle, for all the good it did with no sports teams. My father and I were sitting in our recliners in the living room watching television when the phone rang from the kitchen. He dropped a leg rest on his chair and headed to the kitchen to answer it. Just like any nosy asshole kid, I turned down the volume on the television a few notches to eavesdrop on him. Over the years, he had told me more police duty horror stories than a kid should probably hear, but I was still a snoop. "Hello?" my dad said. "No, I'm at the house with Kevin. What's wrong?" "You're shitting me. Where's the car?" "No, I'll come as soon as I can get my shoes on." "Yeah, have Jim bring the ambulance. Don't run the lights. I'm on my way." He hung up the phone, and I turned the television back up, and did my best to pretend I hadn't heard anything. I could hear him walk into his bedroom, and then back into the living room. "Sorry, kiddo," he said with a forced smile. "Looks like there's some car trouble at the edge of town. I gotta go check it out. In bed by 10, please." I nodded in agreement. He was out the door before my head stopped moving. Usually, when he received a work call during the night, he would pull out of the driveway and turn on his cruiser lights. But tonight, he left them off. Something about it felt odd. My father must have come home well after I had gone to sleep the previous night. The next morning, I found him in his recliner, still in his work clothes. He was so still, I thought he was asleep. But when I headed towards the door to go to school, I could see that his eyes were open and underscored with dark bags beneath. "Dad? You okay?" I asked him. "Yeah," he replied, without looking at me. "Just had to work late. Have a good day at school." I hesitated for a second and thought about asking a follow-up question, but it seemed like a bad time. Instead, I just waved and headed out the door to school. This was the first time I saw him in a daze, but sadly, it was just the beginning. Over the coming months, the nighttime calls increased, and my father was gone more frequently during the night. Every morning, I would find him in his recliner with the same blank look, sitting in wrinkled work clothes. The dark bags under his eyes just continued to get deeper, and his once dark hair was beginning to show thick patches of gray. More than once, I asked him what was happening so often at night that he had to go in, and he would give me generic excuses. There was a breakdown on the highway. Someone was drunk and wandering around the downtown area. Someone broke into a house on the other side of town. Things that were generally believable, but just didn't happen often in Coldstone. A few issues a month wasn't unusual, but this was over the top. One evening, the phone rang again with all the usual trappings. My father told me he had to go to work and he would be back later that evening. I nodded in agreement like usual, but this time, I decided I wanted to find out what was going on. During his phone call, I heard him repeat the address of the incident, and decided I would head over on my bike after he left and watch from a distance. It was only a mile away, so it wouldn't be hard to get there and get back home before Dad even knew I was there. It was about 10 p.m. when he left, so I gave him a 5-minute head start, and then went outside and hopped on my bike. As I pedaled down the road, the streetlights danced off the gargoyles' eyes. The street was lined with them at the end of each walkway, and they stood there silent vigil as I pumped the pedals down the road. Usually, I was fascinated with the hundreds of unique designs in town, but tonight, it felt like the stone legions were watching me suspiciously. I arrived just shy of the location and leaned my bike against a tree, and worked my way into the bushes and foliage. The address had led me to a nearby park, and I could see red and blue lights flickering off the side of the jungle gym of the playground. As I surveyed the scene looking for the disturbance, I could tell something was missing that was usually there, but I didn't immediately know what it was. While trying to remember what object was missing, I heard the first roar. It sounded similar to a lion's, but was much deeper, and seemed to make the ground rumble beneath my feet. We had mountain lions and other predators in New Mexico, but to my knowledge, we had never seen one in town. Panic filled my veins, as my eyes darted from side to side trying to find the source of the terrible noise. "Jezreel," someone shouted from inside the park. "It's over. They're dead. No one else is here." Another deafening roar resounded in response, and I pushed myself against the tree behind me. "It's time to go back to sleep, Jezreel," the same voice bellowed. "The danger is gone. We are fine. You can sleep again." Again, another roar came forth, but this one was much lower. I can now hear a heaving pounding coming from the other side of the bushes, moving toward the center of the park's pavilion. As my eyes drifted toward the pavilion in the center, it finally dawned on me what was missing. The gargoyle that usually stood perched on the slab of concrete was gone. The rhythmic stomping continued until the rear legs of a colossal stone beast came into view. It was walking backwards toward the pedestal. As it continued its backward motion, more of it came into view. A body like a mountain lion made of pure granite came fully into view, before revealing the hellish face. Two large, pointed ears twitched in response to the sounds all around. A set of horns protruded from just below the ears, and another set from the lower jaw. Row after row of stone teeth dripped with blood and flecks of gore. Its eyes glistened with the lights of the siren. It had almost fully perched back onto the pedestal when I saw the man walking in front of it, arms raised, speaking to it in a soothing voice. It was my father. Before I could gain control of myself, I stood up and called out to him, "Dad, run!" My father turned his head toward me, and when we locked eyes, his expression was a mix of fear and panic. I heard the gargoyle roar again, and looked toward it. Before I could pull my feet off the ground to run, the creature sprang from the pedestal and knocked me to the ground beside the tree. I tried to scramble backward, but the beast straddled its two legs over top of me and pinned me to the ground with its flat nose. "Don't fight it, Kevin," I heard my dad yell. "Be still, and let it smell you." My mind raced as I did my best to stay still, as the horror above me began to deeply inhale through its nose. It nudged me as it sniffed, and little flecks of blood and flesh dropped from its muzzle onto my shirt. After what felt like an eternity, it backed away, and slowly padded back to the pedestal. I sat up and watched as it sat on its hindquarters, and adjusted its neck before seeming to freeze in place. As soon as it had settled, my father ran to me and checked me for injuries. Once he could see that I was unharmed, he held me tightly to his chest, and I sobbed into his shirt. After I had calmed a bit, he walked me to his patrol car, and sat me in the front seat. I tried to tell him about my bike against the tree, but he ignored me and began to pull out of the park. As we exited the park, I could see two other squad cars with lights on, and two deputies my father worked with, standing next to a blood-covered sheet draped over something on the ground. There was a third car there, the driver's door ripped off and sitting on the ground beside the sheet. An ambulance passed us as we pulled onto the road. "The hell was that, Dad?" I asked, barely able to hold back my panicked tears. "That was Jezreel," my father answered in a matter-of-fact tone. "He is the oldest guardian in town." "He's... what?" I stammered. "What do you mean, guardian?" My father sighed and ran a hand across his tired eyes. "We'll talk about this when we get home, son." A few minutes later, he pulled the patrol car into the driveway, and we headed inside. I changed out of my blood-covered shirt and waited in the living room for my father. He came in with a glass of whiskey for himself, and a soda for me. I sipped on it to keep myself occupied, and we sat in silence for a while.
Kevin,
my father started.
This information won't make a lot of sense to you. But please keep in mind, I'm going to tell you everything that I know.
I nodded in response, but didn't speak. My father began to tell me a history of our tiny town that I had never heard of. The gargoyles that lined the streets and perched on the buildings were living creatures. No one was exactly sure how it started. The adults of the town knew that if anyone from outside the town attempted to stay there after dark, the closest stone creature would come to life and consume them. That was why there was no hotel in town. The tourists were always welcome to come see all the grim creatures in the daylight, but by night the town would shutter the businesses, and the tourists would leave. Recently, there had been a surge of nighttime visitors to the town. It had been decades since this had happened, due to an increased nighttime patrol by the sheriff's office to keep strangers at a safe distance. Unfortunately, some internet forums full of strange tales had begun discussing rumors of the living statues of Coldstone, New Mexico. My father thought it was likely a former resident who had escaped town, but no one was sure. Regardless of how the legends were started, there was now a steadily increasing amount of inquisitive people coming to see if they could spot one of the gargoyles during the night. Each time, the traveler would be killed, and my father, along with the other deputies, would have to go to the scene to clean the remains and dispose of the evidence. When I asked him why the hell we still lived in this terrifying place, and told him that we should just leave, he just chuckled.
That's the trouble, Kevin. We can't leave. Not forever, anyway. If you're born here, the gargoyles know the scent of you. That's what kept you safe tonight.
He paused for a moment, and drank down the last bit of amber liquid in his glass.
The trouble is, if we were to leave town, we'd be fine for a while. But eventually one of the gargoyles would try to find us, and would bring us back here. They think they're keeping us safe, but we're just trapped here.
I suddenly thought of Ogle and Yarlin in the front yard by the sidewalk. If I left here, would they follow me and try to bring me back? Surely not. They had sat in the same spot since I could remember, smiling into the street with little dots of stone slowly chipping away.
What if you won't go back with them?
I asked finally.
They'll kill you,
he replied. I didn't ask how he knew that, but the quick and certain response left no doubt in my mind that he knew it to be true. We never discussed any of this again after that night. Of course, I had other questions, but in my bones, I knew I would hate the answers. The late-night work calls and long hours hounded my father for the remainder of my high school years. Watching him deteriorate after so many of these killings was becoming more than I could handle. One evening, while he was out on another call, I packed up all of my belongings and loaded the old pickup, which I had gotten for graduation, and left town. It broke my heart to leave my father, but I couldn't watch him waste away anymore, and I couldn't imagine living here knowing what I know now. With no marketable skills or higher education, life was rough for me for a long time. I drove that old rust bucket from New Mexico to South Portland, Maine. It was as far as I could think to get without leaving the country. I've been living here for about 5 years now. I managed to get a decent job as a cook in a little seafood restaurant on the harbor, and I live in a converted apartment above a garage out back. The snowy winters are still a welcome change from the high heat and parched ground of New Mexico. Most evenings, I just sit and watch it snow while I read a book. So, why am I telling you all this? The cat's already out of the bag online about Coldstone, so it isn't a warning for you if that's what you're thinking. I just want someone to know what happened to me, should the fine people of South Portland end up short one seafood cook. A few weeks ago, I started to notice tracks in the snow around the restaurant. and my makeshift apartment. The owner says dogs come around sometimes and try to pick through the garbage. But that's not it. Earlier tonight, as I sat in my chair with an old paperback in my lap, I watched the heavy flakes of snow drifting through the air. The lights on the docks reflected off the flakes, and it reminded me of the flecked eyes of the gargoyles back home. As I looked off into the distance, I could see two figures perched on top of the pillars of the dock. Ogle and Yarlin sat gazing in my direction, with the same wicked grins they've always had. They found me, and I think they have come to take me home. I don't intend to go. Hey everybody. Following today's video, I'll be doing a fireside chat with the author. I hope you'll join me on my brand new channel, the Grupe Project, where I'll be doing post-story author interviews every Friday, throughout the rest of May and June. Check out the description below for more details, or type @the Grupe Project, that's GRUPE, Grupe, in your search bar.
Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.